The crystal chandeliers in the main dining room of the Vance estate, Greenwich, Connecticut, cast a warm, almost deceptive glow. My 62nd birthday. Outside, the manicured lawns were probably perfect, but inside, the air felt thick, heavy with unspoken things. Sarah, my daughter, sat across from me, her smile a little too bright, a little too fixed. David, her husband, was beside her, all charm and practiced ease, but his eyes, when they flicked towards me, held something sharp. Michael, my husband, was a steady presence at my right hand. His quiet gaze a comfort, though I knew he felt it too, the tension humming beneath the polite chatter. It was supposed to be a nice family affair, a celebration. But the politeness felt like a thin sheet of ice over deep, dark water. Sarah had been distant lately, and David had always been ambitious, a bit too eager to please, but lately it felt like more than that. Calculation. The clinking of silverware against fine china seemed unnaturally loud. I took a sip of my water, the ice cold against my tongue. I'd spent years navigating difficult situations, both in the courtroom and in life. This felt like another one, just dressed up in fancy clothes. Sarah was talking about some new exhibit at the Gilded Frame, her gallery in Soho. Her voice was smooth, modulated, the kind of voice that could sell anything. David chimed in, agreeing enthusiastically, his hand resting on the small of her back. It was a picture of marital bliss, or at least the performance of it. I watched them, my own smile polite, my mind already working, sifting through the layers, looking for the truth beneath the polished surface. This was my birthday after all. I deserved to know what was really going on. The moment for toasts arrived. Michael, ever the gentleman, raised his glass first, his eyes meeting mine with that familiar steady warmth. "To Eleanor," he began, his voice a low rumble. "My wife, my partner, my best friend. May your day be as bright as you make every day for us." It was simple, heartfelt, and exactly what I needed to hear. I offered him a genuine smile, a silent thank you. Then Sarah stood. She clutched her wine glass, her knuckles white. The bright, fixed smile from earlier was back, stretched thin. The polite hum of conversation around the table died down, everyone turning their attention to her. David sat beside her, his own glass already raised, a subtle nod of encouragement. I felt a familiar prickle of unease. This wasn't the easy, loving toast I'd expected. "Mom," Sarah began, her voice a little too loud, a little too brittle, like cheap crystal about to shatter. "Happy birthday." She paused, and the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. The chandeliers seemed to dim slightly, or maybe it was just the way the light caught the sudden, hard glint in her eyes. "You know, we've all been thinking a lot lately. About family. About what it means." My own hand tightened around my glass. Michael gave my hand a reassuring squeeze under the table. I could feel his awareness, his quiet support. He knew, as I did, that Sarah had been building up to something. The distance, the sharp words disguised as jokes, the way she'd flinched when I offered advice about the gallery. It all pointed to this. "And we've come to a decision," Sarah continued, her gaze locked on mine. It felt like a spotlight, harsh and unforgiving. A decision about what's best for family. David's arm was around her, possessive, his thumb stroking her back. It looked like support, but I knew him. It was control. "Mom, it's just, you interfere too much," she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more venomous. "You always think you know best. With the gallery, with everything. You don't trust me. You never have. You're always judging, always criticizing. It's exhausting." She took a shaky breath. "And frankly, it's not healthy for anyone. Especially not for Chloe. Chloe. My sweet, innocent granddaughter." The mention of her name, used as a weapon, stung more than anything else. My mind raced, sifting through the last few months, trying to pinpoint the exact moment this chasm had opened between us. Had I been too critical? Had I overstepped? I'd only wanted to help, to share the experience I'd gained. "So," Sarah said, her voice gaining a chilling finality, "we've decided. For the good of everyone. "You're not welcome anymore, Mom. Not in our lives. Not in this family." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, cutting through the warmth of the room. The polite chatter had ceased entirely. Every eye was on us. Michael sat perfectly still, his jaw tight. David offered a small, almost imperceptible smirk. It was a declaration of war, delivered with a saccharine smile on my own birthday. I felt a wave of something akin to shock, but beneath it, a familiar, cold resolve began to settle. This wasn't a party anymore. This was a battlefield. And I, Eleanor Vance, had never backed down from a fight. I looked at my daughter, truly looked at her, and saw not the child I'd raised, but a stranger, fueled by something I no longer recognized. The silence that followed Sarah's words was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the weight of it, pressing down on everyone. My own breath hitched, a tiny, involuntary gasp. Michael's hand squeezed mine again, a silent anchor in the storm Sarah had unleashed. David, beside her, looked smug, like he'd just won the lottery. He probably thought he had. But I wasn't the woman I was 20 years ago, or even 10. The courtroom had taught me a lot about people, about their tells, their weaknesses, and their lies. It had also taught me about preparation. About having your ducks in a row, your facts straight, and your exit strategy planned. Sarah's venom, her outright rejection, was brutal, yes. It hurt like a physical blow. But it wasn't unexpected. Not entirely. The distance, the sharp edges in her voice, the way she'd started avoiding my calls, it had all been leading to this. My mind, usually a whirlwind of emotion in situations like this, felt remarkably clear. The shock was there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was quickly being overtaken by something else. A quiet, steely resolve. This wasn't the time for tears or shouting. This was the time for action. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting it out evenly. My gaze remained fixed on Sarah, not accusatory, not angry, but steady. I saw the flicker of surprise in her eyes, the slight widening of her pupils. She'd expected hysterics, a breakdown, a desperate plea. She was getting none of that. With a practiced calm, I reached into my small, elegant clutch purse. My fingers brushed against familiar textures. Soft leather, crisp paper. Michael watched me, his expression unreadable, but I knew he trusted me. He always had. I pulled out a single item, a bespoke, embossed envelope. It was thick, creamy paper, the kind that spoke of quality and careful thought. The gold lettering on the front was simple, elegant. For Sarah. It was a birthday gift. The one I'd brought, knowing there might be complications. My smile when I offered it to her was genuine, though perhaps a little tighter than usual. "Sarah, darling," I said, my voice even and calm, cutting through the tension. "I know this is a difficult moment, and I appreciate your honesty. But it's still my birthday, and I did want to give you your present." I held out the envelope. It wasn't a peace offering. It was something far more potent. Sarah stared at it, then at me, her mouth slightly agape. David leaned in, his eyes narrowing, a flicker of curiosity overriding his smugness. The anticipation in the room shifted, the focus now on this small, unassuming piece of paper. The air crackled with a different kind of energy, a nervous, uncertain hum. Sarah hesitated, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for it. Her fingers, usually so manicured and precise, fumbled for a moment before closing around the envelope. She looked at it as if it might bite her. David's arm was still around her, his presence a heavy weight. His gaze fixed on the envelope, clearly wondering what kind of token gesture I'd decided to bestow upon her after her declaration. The other guests, the friends and family who had been so polite and attentive moments before, were now frozen, their eyes darting between Sarah, David, and me. The carefully constructed facade of the party had completely fractured. They were witnessing something raw, something real, and the discomfort was palpable. Sarah's grip tightened on the envelope. Her eyes, when they met mine again, held a mixture of defiance and something else. A dawning apprehension. She had expected me to crumble. Instead, I had presented her with a gift. And in the subtle, deliberate way I handed it over, in the calm, unwavering gaze I held, she must have sensed that this was no ordinary birthday present. This was a move. And the game, it seemed, was far from over. It was just beginning. Sarah's fingers, usually so steady when handling delicate artwork, were actually shaking as she took the envelope. David's arm tightened around her. His usual smirk replaced with a look of almost predatory curiosity. He leaned in, his breath warm on her ear, whispering something I couldn't quite catch, but I saw Sarah nod, her eyes still locked on the thick, creamy paper. The other guests, the ones who'd been so eager to celebrate with me just moments before, were now a silent, watchful audience. It was like a scene from a movie, everyone holding their breath, waiting for the next act. I watched them, my own breath held. This was it. The moment of truth. I'd spent weeks, months really, putting this together. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. Sarah and David, they were like a force of nature, a whirlwind of ambition and entitlement, and they were heading straight for a cliff. I just happened to have the map. Sarah finally tore into the envelope, not with the careful grace she usually displayed, but with a sudden, almost desperate urgency. She pulled out the contents, a few crisp sheets of paper, neatly organized, and a small antique silver locket. David snatched the papers from her, his eyes scanning them rapidly. His initial confident posture started to falter. His brow furrowed, then his eyes widened, darting back and forth across the page like a cornered animal. Sarah, seeing his reaction, snatched the papers back, her own face paling as she read. The polite hum of conversation had completely died. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the shallow, ragged breaths of my daughter and son-in-law. The smiles on their faces, the ones they'd worn so effortlessly earlier, had vanished, replaced by expressions of pure, unadulterated shock. Then came the disbelief. Sarah shook her head, a small, bewildered motion. David grabbed her arm, his voice a low, urgent hiss, too quiet for anyone else to hear, but I could see the panic rising in his eyes. They were looking at proof. Hard, undeniable proof. Not just of David's shady dealings, but of how deeply he'd manipulated Sarah, how he'd used her trust, her inheritance, to fund his own reckless ventures. The documents detailed offshore accounts, shell corporations, falsified invoices. The whole sordid mess laid bare. It was all there, meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and damning. The antique silver locket, a keepsake from my own grandmother, was tucked inside, a silent reminder of the legacy David had so carelessly tried to tarnish. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes wide and glassy, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. The defiance was gone, replaced by a raw, vulnerable fear. David, however, wasn't done. He snatched the papers again, his face a mask of fury, his voice rising, no longer a hiss but a guttural growl. "This is garbage. You can't prove any of this." He spat, his gaze locking onto mine, a desperate plea hidden beneath the bluster. He was trying to regain control, to rewrite the narrative, but the evidence was too strong. It was like trying to argue with a judge who already had the verdict in hand. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with unspoken accusations and the palpable weight of betrayal. David's face was a storm cloud. His grip on Sarah's arm was tight, almost bruising. "This is garbage," he roared, his voice cracking with a mixture of panic and rage. He snatched the papers from Sarah's hand again, waving them wildly. "You can't prove any of this. This is a lie." His eyes, usually so slick and confident, were wide and desperate, darting around the room as if searching for an escape hatch. He was trying to bluster, to intimidate, to make me back down. But the carefully organized documents in his hand were his undoing. I watched him, my own heart thudding, but my mind was clear. The prosecutor in me, the one who'd spent decades dissecting lies and building cases, was on full display. I knew exactly how much he hated being cornered. He thrived on charm and deception, not on facts. And these facts, they were brutal. They were the truth, laid bare in black and white. "Oh, I can prove it, David," I said, my voice low and steady, cutting through his bluster. I didn't raise my voice. There was no need. The evidence spoke for itself. Every single transaction, every shell company, every falsified invoice. It's all there. Meticulously documented, cross-referenced, and damning. Sarah, still clutching the antique silver locket, her face ashen, looked from David to me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what David had done, not just to me or to their finances, but to. He'd played her, used her trust, her inheritance, to fund his own greedy schemes. The ambition she'd always admired in him, the drive she thought would make them unstoppable, had been nothing more than a cover for his deep-seated corruption. David's face contorted. He looked like a cornered animal, his chest heaving. He started to ramble, spitting out accusations, trying to turn the tables, to make it seem like was the one playing dirty. "You planted this. This is some kind of setup. You always hated me, always thought I wasn't good enough for Sarah." Michael, standing quietly beside me, placed a hand on my arm. His presence was a solid anchor, a silent reassurance. He'd known about David for a while, had helped me gather some of this information, though he'd never told Sarah, wanting to protect her until I was absolutely certain. And I was. "It's not about you not being good enough, David," I said, my voice laced with a weariness that had settled deep in my bones. "It's about you being a thief, liar, and a terrible husband." The guests were a silent tableau, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. The air in the room was thick, suffocating. The polite smiles were gone, replaced by wide eyes and slack jaws. They were witnessing the unraveling of a carefully constructed life, a public dissection of deceit. Sarah finally found her voice, a small, broken whisper. "David, is this true?" Her eyes, brimming with unshed tears, pleaded for an answer, for a denial that I knew wouldn't come. He looked at her, his gaze flickering, and for a split second, I saw genuine fear in his eyes, not just of me, but of Sarah's realization. He knew he was caught. The smooth facade had cracked, revealing the rot beneath. He tried one last, desperate gambit, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You believe her over me? After everything?" But Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the papers in his hand, then at the locket in her own. The truth, it seemed, was finally sinking in. The weight of it was crushing. And in that moment, watching my daughter's world shatter, I felt a pang of something unexpected, something akin to pity. It was a hollow victory, this exposure of such deep, self-inflicted damage. "Okay, Sarah, you want to know how deep this goes? How he played you, played all of us. It's worse than you can imagine. David didn't just dip his toes in. He built a whole damn swimming pool of lies with your money. Think about those investments we made together, the ones that were supposed to grow for both your futures. He'd show you these fancy spreadsheets, all numbers and projections, making it look like he was some kind of financial wizard. But it was all smoke and mirrors, honey. He was systematically moving money, siphoning it off into shell corporations he'd set up. Little ghost companies with no real purpose, just a way to funnel cash out of sight. I've got the bank records, the wire transfer confirmations, the whole sordid trail. He was like a magician, making your inheritance disappear right before your eyes, and you were too busy admiring his patter to notice the sleight of hand. Remember that trust fund your grandmother set up? The one meant to secure your future, to give you a safety net. David saw it as his personal piggy bank. He'd borrow from it, promising to pay it back with interest, but that was just another lie. He'd use it to cover losses from his other shady deals, to prop up his failing ventures. He even used some of it to buy that ridiculous sports car he's so proud of. He manipulated the paperwork, made it look like loans, like legitimate business expenses. He twisted every agreement, every promise, to fit his narrative. It wasn't just about the big chunks of money either. It was the little things too. The constant nickel-and-diming. He'd inflate invoices for consulting fees, management expenses, all of it going straight into his pockets. He'd divert funds from joint accounts, leaving you with the bills while he was off living the high life. He made sure you never saw the full picture, always presenting just enough to keep you satisfied, to keep you from digging too deep. He was a master manipulator, Sarah, and you were his favorite target. He knew you trusted him, and he used that trust like a weapon. He's been systematically draining your financial life, leaving you vulnerable, dependent, all while painting himself as the successful provider. It's a sick, twisted game he's been playing, and he's been winning for a long, long time. But not anymore. Sarah finally found her voice, a small, broken whisper. David, is this true? Her eyes, brimming with unshed tears, pleaded for an answer, for a denial that I knew wouldn't come. He looked at her, his gaze flickering, and for a split second, I saw genuine fear in his eyes, not just of me, but of Sarah's realization. He knew he was caught. The smooth facade had cracked, revealing the rot beneath. He tried one last, desperate gambit, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You believe her over me? After everything? But Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the papers in his hand, then at the locket in her own. The truth, it seemed, was finally sinking in. The weight of it was crushing. And in that moment, watching my daughter's world shatter, I felt a pang of something unexpected, something akin to pity. It was a hollow victory, this exposure of such deep, self-inflicted damage. It's not about you not being good enough, David, I said, my voice laced with a weariness that had settled deep in my bones. It's about you being a thief, liar, and a terrible husband. David scoffed, a pathetic attempt at bravado. Oh, come on, Eleanor. You're making this a bigger deal than it is. Phew. Creative accounting moves. It's how business is done. He turned back to Sarah, his tone shifting, trying to play the victim. Sarah, honey, you know I'd never do anything to hurt you. Your mom's just trying to stir up trouble like always. Is jealous. Sarah flinched at the word jealous, but her gaze remained fixed on the documents. She started to flip through them, her hands trembling. Each page seemed to confirm my words, each number a fresh stab wound. Shell companies. For what, David? To hide money from me. Her voice was barely audible, cracking with disbelief and dawning horror. My inheritance. The money Grandma left me. It was for us, Sarah. For our future. To build something bigger. David's voice rose, a desperate attempt to regain control, to drown out the truth with sheer volume. He grabbed for the papers, trying to snatch them back, but Sarah held on, her grip surprisingly firm. Our future, she repeated, her voice gaining a dangerous edge. Or your gambling debts. Your failed investments. You lied to me, David. You looked me in the eye and lied. She was no longer looking at me. Her entire focus was on him, on the man she'd built her life around, now exposed as a fraud. The guests, who had been frozen in place, a silent tableau of shock, began to murmur amongst themselves. The air in the grand ballroom of the Vance estate felt thick, charged with unspoken accusations and the palpable breakdown of a carefully constructed life. Michael stood beside me, a solid anchor, his hand resting lightly on my arm, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we had unleashed. David's face was a mask of fury and desperation. He was cornered, the charm offensive failing miserably. He tried one last, desperate gambit, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You believe her over me? After everything? But Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the papers in his hand, then at the antique silver locket she still clutched. The truth, it seemed, was finally sinking in. The weight of it was crushing. And in that moment, watching my daughter's world shatter, I felt a pang of something unexpected, something akin to pity. It was a hollow victory, this exposure of such deep, self-inflicted damage. David's bravado crumbled, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. He knew there was no talking his way out of this one. The game was up. The polite applause died down, leaving a silence that felt heavier than any sound. Sarah's face, usually so composed, was a mask of pure fury, her eyes darting between David and me. The shock hadn't faded. It had curdled into something ugly, something dangerous. You knew, she spat, her voice tight with disbelief and betrayal, aimed squarely at David. He flinched, but his usual smooth deflection was failing him. He was trapped, just like she was, by the reality I'd laid bare. How could you do this, David? Her voice cracked, the carefully constructed facade of her life crumbling around her. The ambition that usually fueled her, the desperate need to prove herself, was replaced by raw, gut-wrenching hurt. She looked at him like he was a stranger, a monster she'd invited into her home. And then her gaze swung to me, sharp and accusatory. And you, Mom. You let this happen. You him. The accusation hung in the air, thick with years of unspoken resentment. I saw it then, the way her mind worked, twisting my actions, my attempt to protect her, into another betrayal. In her twisted logic, I was the enemy, the one who had somehow orchestrated this entire mess, even though I was the one who'd pulled her back from the brink. Sarah, I did this I said, my voice calm, though a storm raged inside me. To protect you. Protect me, she shrieked, her voice rising, echoing in the suddenly too small room. By letting him ruin me. By letting him steal everything. Tears streamed down her face, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of rage. She was lashing out, desperate to find someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. David was too busy trying to salvage his own skin. His own carefully crafted image. He ruining you, David finally managed, his voice strained. But this isn't how it should have come out. He shot me a venomous look, a silent promise of retribution. Oh, I'm so sorry my gift wasn't to your liking, I retorted, my own anger finally bubbling to the surface. Perhaps next time, I'll remember to consult with you on how best to expose your deceit. Sarah let out a strangled sob, her hands flying to her temples. I can't believe this. She looked at David, then at me, her world tilting on its axis. The carefully curated life she'd built, the one she so desperately wanted me to admire, was a lie. And I, her mother, had been the one to tear it all down. The hurt in her eyes was a physical blow, but beneath it, I saw the simmering fury, a volatile cocktail of anger directed at both of us. This was far from over. The air in the ballroom was still thick with the aftermath, the shocked silence of the guests a heavy blanket. Sarah stood there, her face a mess of tears and fury, looking at me like I'd personally handed David the keys to her entire life. David, meanwhile, was trying to regain some semblance of control. His eyes darting between us, a cornered rat. You think this is over? David finally managed. His voice a strained whisper directed at me. You think you've won? I met his gaze, my own expression unreadable. Winning isn't about you, David. It's about protecting my daughter. I turned to Sarah, my voice softening, though the steel was still there, a bedrock beneath the surface. Sarah, honey, I know this is a lot. Shuck. But this isn't the end. It's a new beginning. She was still trembling, her eyes wide, scanning the papers I'd placed on a nearby antique table, the irrefutable proof of David's double-dealing. A new beginning. Mom, he gambled away my inheritance. He lied about everything. My future. Her voice broke, a raw sound of pure despair. Your future is secure, Sarah, I stated, my tone firm, cutting through her panic. That's what this is all about. David's actions, his creative accounting, as he calls it, it gave me leverage. Leverage I've been building for years. David scoffed, a hollow sound. Leverage? What are you talking about, Eleanor? I'm talking about the fact that every single one of those shell companies, every shady transaction, every stolen dollar, it all traces back to you, David. And I've made sure that Sarah's name is on every single asset you tried to hide. Her inheritance, the money from the gallery, even the investments you thought were solely yours. It's all legally hers now. Every last cent. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes locking onto mine, a flicker of something other than rage, confusion, maybe even a sliver of hope. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't just expose him, Sarah," I continued, walking over to the table and picking up a single dried white rose that had fallen from a centerpiece. I held it loosely in my hand, the delicate petals a stark contrast to the harsh reality of the moment. I used his own greed against him. I worked with a team of lawyers, the best ones from my old firm Vance & Associates. We've been quietly restructuring everything. Your assets, David's assets that were rightfully yours. They're all in a trust, managed by me and a board of trustees. You have complete control, Sarah. No one can touch it. Not him, not anyone. He can't touch your future anymore. David's face drained of all color. He looked from me to Sarah, his jaw working, but no sound came out. He was utterly, completely broken.
De savager, de charme, de predator glin, all gone, replaced by the stark terror of a man who had finally, truly lost everything. He had played his game, and with years of forensic and a mother's fierce protectiveness, had simply changed the rules. He had underestimated me, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. And in a strange, twisted way, he had inadvertently paved the way for Sarah's true independence. The air in the ballroom was still thick, a ave, suffocating blank of shock. David sat there, his face a mask of pure terror, the color completely drained. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting between Sarah and me, searching for an escape that was there. He played his game, and they just called his bluff, and then some. Sarah, she was still trembling, her eyes wide and unfocused, scanning the papers and the laid out. The proof. All of it. Her inheritance, her future, all tied up in David's greed little schemes. Your future is secure, Sarah I told her. My voice steadied, cutting through her panic like a laser. That's what this is all about. I devastated her eyes, that flicker of confusion, maybe even a sliver of hope, as he laid out how he used his own greed against him. Vance Associates, my old firm, they been bus. Restructuring everything. Every shade deal, every shell company, every stolen dollar, all herote, all legal Sarah's now. A trust, managed by me and a board of trustees. She had control. He could not touch it. He could not touch her anymore. David finally found his voice, a shocked, pathetic sound. Leverage. What are you talking about, Eleanor? He tried to bluster, to deny, but the evidence was at that wave, and he was drowning. He underestimated me. He thought he was just some old lady, content to play bridge and host garden parties. He forgotten he was Eleanor Vance, former prosecutor, master strategist stagisters. I descendis coming from a mile away, and they been playing the long game. Sarah looked at me then, Uriel looked at me, and for a second, I saw something other than anger. It was a deafening comprehension, a realization that maybe, just maybe, it had been the villain of her story. Maybe the been the one trying to save her from the real monster. But then the hurt resurfaced, the years of perceived slights, the deep-seated resentment that had festered between us. She always felt he was too controlling, too critical, always trying to mold her into something she was. She never understood that all he wanted was for her to be safe, to be truly free. You think this is over? David whispered, his voice raw. You think you've won? I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. Whining is about you, David. It is about protecting my daughter. I turned back to Sarah, my voice softening. Sarah, honey, I know this is a lot. Is a shock. But this is the end. It is a new beginning. She was still trembling, her eyes wide, scanning the papers. A new beginning. Mom, he gambled away my inheritance. He lit about everything. My future. Her voice broke, a raw sound of pure despair. The facade had cracked. The carefully constructed image of the perfect couple, the successful gallery of Ner and her influential husband, had shattered into a million pieces. And beneath it all, dero, ugly truth. Years of manipulation, greed, and deep-seated resentment. Sarah's resentment towards me. And David's insatiable greed. It was all out in the open now. The carefully maintained illusion gone, leaving only the wreckage. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Sarah's raged breaths and David's stunned, defeated whimpers. This was the moment, the precipice, where everything changed. The silence in the ballroom was thick, heavy. Not the comfortable que after a good meal, but the kind that suffocates, the kind that screams unspoken accusations. David stood there, a statue carved from pure dread, his face pale, his eyes wide and vacant. Sarah, my Sarah, was still shaking, her breath coming in shallow gas. The papers it laid out, the irrefutable proof of David's grub dealings, lay between them like a battlefield map. I watched them, my own heart a strange mix of cold fury and something else. Something softer. It was a pity, really. A profound, almost very pity. Looking at them, at the wreckage of their carefully constructed lives, I saw not triumph, but the hollow echo of ambition gone wrong. David, the charming shemer, reduced to a cornered hat. His would imploding because he could not resist the allure of easy money, the quick fix. He chased the phantom of wealth, and in doing so, he dragged Sarah down with him. And Sarah, my poor, misguided Sarah. She always wanted more, at she? More than he could give her, more than she deserved, perhaps. She craved the glitter, the validation that comes with perceived success, with being part of the in-crowd. She married David for all the wrong reasons, his polish, his promises, his supposed status. She mistaken his sleek veneer for substance, his ambition for her own. She wanted to be a queen, and she ended up married to a con artist. I picked up a single, dried white rose that had fallen from a centerpiece. Its delicate petals were brittle, a stark contrast to the raw, ugly truth that had just been exposed. It reminded me of Sarah's own fragility, buried beneath layers of defiance and resentment. She'd always been so quick to judge me, so eager to believe the worst. She saw my protectiveness as control, my advice as criticism. She never understood that every move made, every word spoke, was an attempt to shield her from the very kind of man she'd chosen, from the very kind of disaster she was now facing. You think this is over? David finally croaked, his voice a raspy whisper, still trying to grasp for some thread of control. I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. Whining is about you, David said, my voice calm, measured. It is about protecting my daughter. I turned to Sarah, my tone softening, though the still was still there, a bedrock beneath the sunface. Sarah, honey, I know this is a lot. Is a shock. But this is the end. It is a new beginning. She was still trembling, her eyes wide, scanning the papers. A new beginning. She shocked out, her voice cracking. Mom, he gambled away my inheritance. He lit about everything. My future. Her voice broke, a raw sound of pure despair. Your future is secure, Sarah stated, my tone firm, cutting through her panic. That's what this is all about. David's actions, his creative accounting, as he calls it gave me leverage. Leverage I've been building for years. David scoffed, a hollow sound. Leverage. What are you talking about, Eleanor? I'm talking about the fact that every single one of those shell companies, every shade transaction, every stolen dollar, it all traces back to you, David. And I've made sure that Sarah's name is on every single asset you treat to it. Her inheritance, the money from the gallery, even the investments you thought were solely yours. It is all legal years now. Every last cent. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes looking onto me, a flicker of something other than rage, confusion, maybe even a sliver of hope. What? She whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't just expose him, Sarah I continued, holding the dread rose. I used his own grade against him. I work with a team of lawyers, the best ones, from my old firm, Vance Associates. We've been quietly restructuring everything. Your assets, David's assets that were rightfully yours, they all in a trust, managed by me and a board of trustees. You have complete control, Sarah. No one can touch it. Not him, not anyone. He can't touch your future anymore. David's face drained off all color. He looked from me to Sarah, he's just working, but no sound came out. He was utterly, completely broken. The savage, the charm, the predator gleam, all gone, replaced by the stark terror of a man who had finally, truly lost everything. He had played his game, and with years of forensic and a mother's fierce protectiveness, had simply changed the rules. He had underestimated me, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate, and in a strange, twisted way, he had inadvertently paved the way for Sarah's true independence. Looking at the ruin he devoted, and the desperate, hollow ambition that had driven him, he felt a pang of something aching to sorrow. It was a sad, pathetic end for a man who had clearly believed himself to be so much more. The silence in the ballroom was a heavy, suffocating blank. David stood there, a statue carved from pure dread, his face pale, his eyes wide and vacant. Sarah, my Sarah, was still shaking, her breath coming in shallow gas. The papers they laid out, the irrefutable proof of David's grub de links, lay between them like a battlefield map. I watched them, my own heart a strange mix of cold fury and something else. Something softer. It was a pity, really. A profound, almost very pity. Looking at them, at the wreckage of their carefully constructed lives, I saw not triumph, but the hollow echo of ambition gone wrong. David, the charming shimmer, reduced to a cornered hat. His would imploding because he could not resist the allure of easy money, the quick fix. He chased the phantom of wealth, and in doing so, he dragged Sarah down with him. And Sarah, my poor, misguided Sarah. She always wanted more, at she? More than he could give her, more than she deserved, perhaps. She craved the glitter, the validation that comes with perceived success, with being part of the in-crowd. She married David for all the wrong reasons, his polish, his promises, his supposed status. She mistaken his sleek veneer for substance, his ambition for her own. She wanted to be a queen, and she ended up married to a con artist. The dread white rose the peak da perler felt brightly in my hand. Its delicate petals were a stark contrast to the raw, ugly truth that had just been exposed. It reminded me of Sarah's own fragility, buried beneath layers of defiance and resentment. She'd always been so quick to judge me, so eager to believe the worst. She saw my protectiveness as control, my advice as criticism. She never understood that every move made, every word spoke, was an attempt to shield her from the very kind of man she'd chosen, from the very kind of disaster she was now facing. David finally found his voice, a shocked, pathetic sound. Leverage. What are you talking about, Eleanor? He tried to bluster, to deny, but the evidence was at that wave, and he was drowning. He underestimated me. He thought he was just some old lady, content to play bridge and host garden parties. He forgotten he was Eleanor Vance, former prosecutor, master strategist stagisters. I descendis coming from a mile away, and I'd been playing the long game. Sarah looked at me then, Uriel looked at me, and for a second, I saw something other than anger. It was a davening comprehension, a realization that maybe, just maybe, I had been the villain of her story. Maybe the been the one trying to save her from the real monster. But then the hurt resurfaced, the years of perceived slights, the deep-seated resentment that had festered between us. She'd always felt he was too controlling, too critical, always trying to mold her into something she was. She never understood that all he wanted was for her to be safe, to be truly free. You think this is over? David whispered, his voice raw. You think you've won? I met his gaze, my expression unreadable. Whining is about you, David. It is about protecting my daughter. I turn back to Sarah. My voice is softening. Sarah, honey, I know this is a lot.
Is
A shock. But this is the end. It is a new beginning. She was still trembling, her eyes wide, scanning the papers. A new beginning. She shocked out, her voice cracking. Mom, he gambled away my inheritance. He lit about everything. My future. Her voice broke, a raw sound of pure despair. Your future is secure, Sarah stated. My tone firm, cutting through her panic. That's what this is all about. David's actions, his creative accounting, as he calls it gave me leverage. Leverage I've been building for years. David scoffed, a hollow sound. Leverage. What are you talking about, Eleanor? I'm talking about the fact that every single one of those shell companies, every shade transaction, every stolen dollar, it all traces back to you, David. And I've made sure that Sarah's name is on every single asset you treat to it. Her inheritance, the money from the gallery, even the investments you thought were solely yours. It is all legal years now. Every last cent. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes looking onto Minnie, a flicker of something other than rage, confusion, maybe even a sliver of hope. What? She whispered. Her voice barely audible. I didn't just pause him, Sarah I continued, holding the dread rose. I used reason greed against him. I work with a team of lawyers, the best ones, from my old firm, Vance Associates. We've been quietly restructuring everything. Your assets, David's assets that were rightfully yours, they all in a trust, managed by me and a board of trustees. You have complete control, Sarah. No one can touch it. Not him, not Anione. He can't touch your future anymore. David's face drained off all color. He looked from me to Sarah, his jaw working, but no sound came out. He was utterly, completely broken. The savager, the charm, the predator gleam, all gone, replaced by the stark terror of a man who had finally, truly lost everything. He had played his game, and he, with years of forensic and a mother's fierce protectiveness, had simply changed the rules. He had underestimated me, and in doing so, he had sealed his own fate, and in a strange, twisted way, he had inadvertently paved the way for Sarah's true independence. Sarah, still pale but with a new, determined gleam in her eyes, looked at David. Then she looked at me. I need to go, she said. Her voice surprisingly stilted. Chloe and I. We can't stay here. She didn't wait for a response. Just turned and walked towards the door. I watched her go, a strange mix of pride and sorrow swirling within me. She was finally taking her first step towards freedom. And it was a step she had to take alone. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that she would be okay. She had my strength, even if she had seen it until now. The Vance Associates, Vance State, Greenwich, Connecticut, Soho, New York City, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, Chatham, Massachusetts, Manhattan, New York City, Michael, Eleanor, Sarah, David, Chloe. The silence in my head was deafening. A stark contrast to the storm brewing outside David's carefully constructed world. He was alone now, truly alone. The lawyers had been swift, almost surgical, their voices cold and devoid of emotion as they laid out the charges. Fraud. Embezzlement. Conspiracy. The words hung in the air, heavy and damning, like the sentence of rain before a downpour. I pictured him, passing his now empty office, the plush carpets and expensive mahogany suddenly feeling like a cage. The phone calls he'd been expecting, the ones that would have smoothed things over, secured his next deal, or placated Sarah, were no longer coming. Instead, they were replaced by the insistent hinging of law enforcement, by the green faces of investigators who saw only a man caught red-handed. His reputation, that shiny veneer he'd worked so hard to polish, had cracked, then shattered, leaving nothing but the ugly truth beneath. His financial standing. A vast land. Every asset, every account, frozen, scrutinized, End Kelly said. The life redebuilt on shack foundations. Fueled by Sarah's inheritance and a outdose of outright theft, had imploded. He was a house of cards. And the simply giving the table a gentle nudge. There was no Sarah to played with, no adoring crowds to impress, no antospin his web of lies for. Just him, the stark reality of his actions. And the chilling realization that he played his last hand, and lost. Miserable. He fought back to the look on his face when he realized the envelope was just a token of my disapproval, but a meticulously documented indictment. That flicker of panic, quickly masked by his usual arrogance. He underestimated me, as they all did. He seen an older woman, perhaps a bit out of touch, certainly not someone who could unravel his intricate schemes. He been so focused on the prize, on climbing higher, that he forgotten the ground beneath his feet could give way. And it had. Spectacular. There was a strange kind of satisfaction in knowing that the architect of so much pain and deception was now facing the demolition of his own making. It was a victory dance, not by a long shot. It was more like the que shall after holding your breath for far too long. The air was clearer, even if the landscape was devastated. He wondered what he was doing right now. Was he staring at the walls, the silence amplifying his own desperate thoughts? Was he replying every decision, every lie, every stolen dollar? Or was he still trying to find an angle, a low folly, a way to talk his way out of it, even though he knew, deep down, that there was no escape this time? The Vance State, Greenwich, Connecticut, felt a million miles away. The Oyster Shanty, Chatham, Massachusetts, felt like a different lifetime. All that mattered was the present, the que aftermath of a battle fought and won, not with brute force, but with precision and unwavering resolve. David was left to pick up the pieces, or rather, to be buried beneath them. And he, Eleanor Vance, was finally free to breathe. The drive out to the Cape felt different this time. Quieter. The usual chatter that filled the car, the easy back and forth between Michael and me, was replaced by a comfortable, yet heavy, silence. We left Greenwich a few days after the incident. The air there had felt thick with unspoken things, with the dust of a life blown apart. Here, at the summer house, the salt spray and the endless horizon offered a different kind of que. It was the kind that lets you finally hear yourself think. We'd been coming to this place for years. Michael had loved it even before we met. A humbling old house with creaky floors and a porch that always smelled faintly of brine and damp wood. It was a world away from the polished perfection of the Vance State. A place where you could shed the expectations and the armor. Michael poured us both a glass of seteia. The ice cubes clinking against the thick glass. He handed me mine, his fingers brushing mine for a moment. He didn't need to say anything. He knew. He always knew. It was necessary, wasn't it? He said, his voice low, almost a murmur, as we sat on the porch swing, watching the waves roll in. He took a slow sip of the tea. The cones a welcome sensation. Yes, he replied. The word catching legal in my throat. It was. But that doesn't make it easy. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the grey expanse of the Atlantic. You know. Saying Sarah like that. It is hard. She's still my daughter, even if she made some terrible choices. She was lost, Michael said, my voice softer now. Chasing something she didn't understand, with someone who only saw her as a means to an end. David really did a number on her. And he let it happen for too long. The guilt, a duash they been pushing down, resurfaced. It was the same as the fury they felt in Greenwich, but it was a heavy, very sadness. You did what you thought was best, Eleanor said, reaching over to take my hand. His grip was firm, grounding. You tried to protect her in your own way. Sometimes, protection means letting them fall so they can learn to stand on their own. But at what cost? He asked, my voice barely a whisper. Her trust in me shattered. And David. I saw him, Michael. After the lawyers left, he was just gone. Like a puppet with its strings cut. And felt a flicker of something for him, too. A kind of pity. For the man he could have been, I suppose. Before the greed took over. It was a confession, a raw admission of the emotional mess this world had created, even for me. Michael squeezed my hand. He made his choices, Eleanor. We all do. You made yours. And they were the right ones. For Sarah's future. For future. Not the one David was trying to steal. Regestured vaguely towards the ocean. This place. It's always been about simpler things. Family, the sea, just being present. Maybe Sarah will find her way back to that. Eventually. Away from all the noise. I looked out at the water. The endless horizon stretching before us. It felt like a vast, open space. A stark contrast to the suffocating confines of the past few weeks. The weight of it all was still there, a palpable thing, but it was shifting. Changing. It was the sharp, beating pain of betrayal anymore. It was the dull, persistent ache of consequence. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds the rhythmic crack of the poor swing and the distant cry of a gull. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the lawn. It was a key end to a tumultuous chapter. A moment of shared understanding between Michael and me. A key acknowledgement of the battles fought and the unexpected emotional toll they had taken. The path ahead for Sarah was still uncertain, but here, in the shelter of Cape Cod, there was a fragile sense of peace. The shelter here in Chatham still works its magic, even after all this time. It's been months since the dust settled back in Greenwich. Months since the carefully constructed old David built came crashing down. Michael and retreated to the Cape. To the familiar comfort of the summer house. It felt like the only place he could truly shall. The storm had passed, leaving behind a key, almost eerie calm. I'd been keeping tabs on Sarah, of course. Not in a overing, intrusive way, but through discreet channels. She filed for divorce almost immediately. Good for her. It was a messy business, all that legal wrangling. But she was handling it with a strength I had seen her for years. She was finally shedding the dead weight of David and his schemes. I heard she moved out of the sprawling house they debug. The one that was supposed to be their ticket into the right circles. Now, she was in a similar place, something more manageable, more. The art gallery, the gilded frame was still hers, too. I'd seen some photos online. She was back to focusing on the art, on the passion that had first drawn her to that wood, before David turned it into another avenue for his own gain. She was curating shows, talking about emerging artists, and from what gathered, doing a pretty decent job of it. It was the same as the high-stakes, ego-driven circus David had tried to make it. This felt real. Grounded. Michael and talked about her often. Had always been the steady one, the voice of reason, and had been my rock through all of it. He understood the difficult choices I'd made, the necessary views. He knew I'd done it all for Sarah, even if she could not sit then. She's finding her feet, Eleanor he'd say. His gaze drifting out towards the ocean. It's a process. She's got your resilience, you know. I hoped he was right. The rift between us was still there. A deep canyon carved by years of misunderstanding and David's poison. But saw glimmers of hope. She started returning my calls, brief conversations, polite. We didn't talk about what happened, not directly. It was like a ghost in the room. Too painful to acknowledge. But there was a softening, a tentative taving. She even asked about Chloe, her daughter, my grandalgauger. That was a big step. Chloe was living with Sarah, of course, and from what I understood, she was doing well, adjusting to the new normal. I'd sent Sarah a simple, unmarked package a few weeks ago. Inside, I'd placed a set of antique sterling silver serving spoons. The ones that had been passed down through my family for generations. They were beautiful, Ave, and meant for a home where people gathered, where meals were shared, not consumed in silent, calculating transactions. It was a key offering, a gesture of continued connection, without demanding anything in return. I didn't expect a thank you, and didn't get one. But knew she received them. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on the porch here, watching the waves roll in, I think about David. The man saw in those final moments, stripped bare of his charm and his bravado, was almost pathetic. The power I revealed, the carefully orchestrated do fall, it had been necessary, but it had felt good. It had felt like a green duty. Had been so consumed by his own ambition, so blinded by greed, that had destroyed himself. And in doing so, had nearly destroyed Sarah. The distance between us now felt like a necessary buffer, a space for a alien. I was no longer the antagonist in Sarah's story, but a silent observer, a source of key unwavering support. The family bond, once so fractured, was slowly, painstakingly, being redefined. It was the picture perfect image I might have once envisioned. But it was real. And in its own way, it was strong. This year here, it had a way of washing things clean, of reminding you of what truly mattered. And what mattered now was Sarah finding her own peace, her own strength, on her own terms. That was the best gift I could give her. That's it. If you like this video, share it with your friends and leave your like. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss more videos like this. Leave your comment in main code saying what you thought of the video and what you would like to see in the next videos. Remembering that we have other videos in this style that you will like to watch, just enter our channel that guarantee you will like. Until the next video.